Hello, I'm Dimitra Janakoulias, and I'm a state coordinator for Braver Angels Oregon. If you're new to Braver Angels, we're a grassroots nonprofit organization dedicated to restoring civic health and reducing partisan conflict. Today I'm speaking with Leeza Edwards. Leeza started out with a career in the military, serving 4 years of active duty in the U.S. Air Force. More recently, she founded a nonprofit organization called Embodied Peace, which reframes divisive narratives on social issues and offers trainings on dialogue, de escalation, and self regulation. She's currently writing books on peace and self awareness and is always ready for a trip to the mountains. Leeza, thank you for being our guest today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I always start this podcast with the same question, which is tell me a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up? And what early influences shaped you as a person?
Well, I grew up in a city called Riverdale, which is south of Atlanta. I jokingly would say that I grew up in the shadow of the airport, was and still is one of the busiest airports in the world. I was shaped by Southern Baptist um, upbringing. It was not a requirement. We were strongly encouraged to go. And I say we, even though I feel like I grew up as an only child, even though I'm the baby of five.
Oh, wow, the baby of five.
Yeah, because
I'm the
there's
baby
such
of
a,
four.
yeah,
Common. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. But I also was an only child, so to speak, because my siblings were so much older than I was. So I relate to what you're saying.
yeah.
Yeah.
The same situation. The closest in age is 6 years, my senior, which is my brother. So that was me. My babysitter was the television, and I lost my hearing, um, which was had a profound impact on me. And no one knew. They just thought I was a problem child in school. The fact was, I couldn't hear them. And my mother found out only because she stamped her foot on the floor on a Saturday, which was cleaning day at the house, and she was vacuuming. And I was about 2 feet away from the big console TV. I was sitting on the floor, and she was apparently yelling my name. And in frustration, she stomped her feet on the floor, and I felt it. And I turned around, and then she realized what was going on. So I turned around to see my mother crying. And so that set an adventure of a series of hearing tests and tubes in my ears, and at least two, if not three, reconstructive surgeries on my ears. And so I went from having hard hearing, extreme hard of hearing, to what my mom called bionic ears. I would be in the house and mom would be on the phone back in the days when we had landlines, and I could hear the other person on the phone, even though I was across the room. And if the
Oh,
TV was on, I could hear the high-pitched squeal of the tubes in the TV, which was unnerving. So I went from quietude to extreme sensitivity to loud noises, electronics, etc. So that had a big impact on my upbringing for sure.
emotionally or psychologically,
Yeah.
how did it impact you exactly?
I was kind of a recluse as it was. I was always looking to belong, to fit in like any kid. Of course, there were aspects of me that I kept quiet, but there was a part of me that needed who I knew myself to be expressed. And so I spent all the time with girls, and I stayed away from boys because they were too aggressive. That led to after the surgery and having this new lease on life, I turned, as, as a friend said, you became your Leo self. And so I became, as my friend said, you're quite the Leo. And as well, just because I was born a certain time of year doesn't mean I carry all the attributes of what you would call a Leo.
Oh, the astrological sign, Leo.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
And so I would kind of embody that a little. And so I became a bit more gregarious, um, more outgoing. I was a very physical child. So I was always outside. And in the 70s, it was, the parents didn't know where you were until it was
Mhm.
time for dinner. Hear the dinner bell, and here I come. But I
Right.
spent most of my time outside until about the age of nine. Well, it was around the age of 9 that I had expressed who I am gender wise. My mother saw that, and her comment to me, her demand to me was, we will never speak of this and you will never tell your father. And so I went from this gregarious kid to being very suppressed, self-suppressed. And that pretty much was the experience until high school when I sort of came out of my shell again and was looking for belonging and connections with others.
Right. So just to be clear with our audience, you were born as a boy. Is that
Yeah.
right? Looked like a regular boy, but you inside you felt yourself to be a girl. Your gender was a girl. And then your mother saw this in you, but said, we cannot speak of this with your father, so we have to hide this. And you did. And so you
Yeah.
could enter a period of suppression until high school, you said.
Yeah, and that sort of became a bit of a rebellious
Mhm.
time, as it often does for teenagers. So rebellious that just before graduation, I was already in the Air Force ROTC in high school. And I relished that because it was a space of discipline. It was a space of structure, and I needed that because of my engagement, my work in junior ROTC in high school. I saw that, well, if I joined the military, that would be my way out because I didn't have a plan after high school as to how I was going to live. And so it was literally a momentary decision where I decided I was going to voluntarily have all my rights taken away from me, all my
Hmm.
autonomy, and join the military. And I was too young. So my father had to co-sign for me to join because of my experience. My colonel in the high school ROTC had wrote an accommodation letter. So after basic training, which was in Texas at Lackland Air Force Base in the mid 80s, I was immediately promoted to a two-striper.
What is that? A two-striper.
As so basically became an airman um,
Okay.
instead of a basic airman.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I immediately, at the last week of basic training, outranked everyone that was my peer. It was an honor and a curse at the same time because it didn't bode well with everyone around me. It's like, how did this kid all of a sudden just outrank us? So I became a target. Yeah, that was my upbringing of carrying a deep secret, not feeling that I could express myself fully, to live fully. And so I stayed in that self-oppressed state for quite some time.
Right, because I would think, you joined the military, you got into the Air Force, you actually did amazingly well so early from the get-go in the air in the Air Force, outranking people, yet you didn't feel you were yourself, right? You were presenting as a man
Yeah.
to the world, but that's not what was on the inside at all. And yet you got by. How did you get by?
Yeah. I had worn the mask that most everyone wears, which is anytime there's uncomfortability, I would set it aside and say, that's not me. So I stayed in a state of denial just to fit in, just to get by, to be liked, to be accepted, um, even though I had no true evidence that I would be rejected. It was assumed that I would be. It was assumed that I would be considered a freak. So therefore, I packed that side of me away. And when I say that side of me, that's a big part of me. When you talk about your own identity, your sense of self, that's a big thing. And I partitioned that out until just before I got out of the Air Force. And it was that last year that I truly became broken and started to live two lives. But because of my assumption about society or the military, there was never discussion about homosexuality or transgenderness was not a word back then because of the fear, the assumption of how I would be received. I literally had a suitcase that was my identity, and I packed everything in that suitcase and put a padlock on it. In my case, it was literally a suitcase with a padlock. And it wouldn't be until a few years later that I sort of gave myself permission to be seen fully. And I had hard times in relationships because I couldn't fully be myself. I never assumed, or I did assume, that the relationship would be temporary. So why try?
So, fast forwarding to the present, I've heard people describe you as someone who can talk to anybody and someone who can take anything, like, take any kind of feedback and not get too hung up about it. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts about those perceptions about you? And how did you come to be that way? Assuming that they're accurate perceptions, right? If they're accurate, how did you come to be that way? And
I do find myself being completely open to having a dialogue with anyone if it's a true dialogue. If someone is more invested in debate, I will encourage them to leave debate behind and to actually have a dialogue. And when I say dialogue, I mean it in the truest sense of how the word is defined as the dialogos, or as I might translate that as the shared meaning,
Mhm.
shared understanding.
The
See,
dia is the like the interchange. Logos is the word. Sorry, I'm
yeah,
Greek. I'm going there.
there you go. That's perfect.
Right.
Exactly.
Just to explain what that, yes, just as you say, what dialogue actually means, which is like a intermeaning, creating a new meaning through the sharing. Right.
As opposed to conversation or discourse, which has its place, of course, just like a debate has its place. As long as there's an openness, if I see there's an openness in the other or multiple others to have a dialogue, I'm invested in that, not in identity, not in their story, not any sense of self-limitation, because I'm looking at them, not their character. And in seeing them for what they truly are, which is not a title, it's not a role, because titles and roles, they change. But what I do know about the self is this, the self does not change, but the archetypes, the characters, the stories, the experiences, they're always changing. But the self that I am, as I know it to be, is also them. And so I come at any engagements, any exchange from a place of curiosity. Even if someone were to be hostile or agitated in any way, is I'm more invested in the underpinnings of that hostility and inviting them into seeing that as well. Of course, that's not always the case. They're not always going to be open. But I don't find myself making it about me as a person or trying to win something or to get to a point. Because to me, the dialogue is life. It is, that's where the juice of life is. That's where we actually meet each other, as it were. So, insofar as somebody says that I could have a conversation with anyone, I guess I could just say to that I see them as beautiful and essential as anyone else. So I don't find myself getting distracted with partisanship or opinion or judgment or any sense of limitation because I know behind that limitation is a sense of sincerity. It's in there somewhere, and it's also in me. It's like a 5-year-old trying to invite another 5-year-old to play on the playground. It's like, it's fine, just come on over.
That sounds amazing and remarkable and something, most of us are certainly not trained to do. And this is definitely learned. I'm hearing you say that you're looking at a person and you're trying to find the core person, the essence of the person, which is in your mind, there's goodness and sincerity and beauty there at the core of people. And they're not their characters, right? Or their archetypes or their roles or their titles. And so for most of us, we muddle all of that up. It's all one and the same, right?
Yeah.
Um, the character, the action, the behavior, uh, the role is the person, but you separate all of that or you parse that out to get to something deeper. Do you think that you're able to do that because you've had to do that for yourself to get back to your real self, your true self, make yourself whole again? Like that you've done that for yourself, now
Yeah.
you're treating others that way. Like I'm looking for the wholeness deep inside that's not all of these exterior characteristics. Is that fair to say?
You're getting close, very close. It's, I'll give you a very short mini story. When I lived in San Francisco before I moved here to Vancouver, Washington, I lived there for about 6 years, and that's where life had fundamentally changed for me. And then I'm going to say it a different way. That's when my perception of life had fundamentally changed. While living there, there was a friendship that I had developed with a friend, Jeff. He's recently passed away, uh, who was quite a character. And it wasn't long into our connection where he invited me to an AA meeting. And he talked about being an alcoholic a lot and that he hadn't drank in, I think, a dozen years. And he does not miss an AA meeting. He goes every week. And he was a long haul truck driver, so he would go, or relatively long haul, he would go from Southern California to Northern California. And he's lived a very interesting life, being raised around Hell's Angels, bikers, gang members, etc., etc. And in his insistence that I come to an AA meeting, and I looked at him and I said, Jeff, why is this so seemingly important? He says, I want you to see where I live, where I'm coming from, what I've gone through. I said, that's fantastic. And I sat in the back of the room. It was amazing. Afterwards, I looked through the library that they had there, and it was what he called the big book. And it had all the 12 steps and everything in there. And basically, as he was recounting this to me, I said to him, these are the 12 steps, yes? He said, yeah. I said, this is Buddhist tenets. I don't know a lot about Buddhism, but this sounds very Buddhist to me. Is that where you're coming from? He goes, you seem to have opened up in a way that it took me the hardship to get there. And I said, well, you got there through this sense of self-awareness or this sense of calm through your addiction. I get there through gender identity, of being accepted, not accepting of myself. And now the society has to accept me or reject me. So I guess that's the parallel. That was sort of stage one, or the opening gambit, as it were, of seeing myself was to go through the lens of, am I the gender that society says that I am? And so releasing that and allowing myself to live fully as female, that opened the gate for me to live in San Francisco. And in that period of time, early in, I think the second year I was living there, I went through an existential crisis. And that had me questioning every thought, every belief, which had nothing to do with gender. This was about life itself. And in that, I literally woke up one morning completely at peace. The night before was an existential crisis that I've never experienced before. And so I broke that evening. And that's sort of a poetic way of putting it, is everything that I thought was real, I had to question. Is up up because there's a down? How do I know that there's an in? Well, because I know that there's an out. And so I went deep within all of these concepts, human concepts, and I felt myself breaking open, as it were. That peace that I woke up with has not left me, and it's been almost 18 years. And it's from this sense of peace and calm that I have felt and perceived through that allows me to engage with people not as individuals, but as a religious friend of mine would call it, children of God.
Children of God.
And my way of saying it was, well, you could call it children of God, but that's a separation, that there's a child here and there's a God over here. And there's some gap in between. I don't see that gap. And it wouldn't be helpful to say, well, you are God, because that doesn't go over very well. So we don't use that language, right?
Right,
It
right.
doesn't help. But to know me is to know how I perceive, just like anyone else. If someone perceives life as to be a pessimist, and they have a lifetime of experience of pessimism, reasons to be pessimistic, that's not me. I
Mm,
see life as love and joy. And
mhm.
so I could say that I see you, but I don't really see you as a separate thing. I see myself reflected in you, or you are a reflection of me. And so that's literally how I perceive. And it's been quite the gift that I don't find, I've not yet experienced in these years a distraction from that. So that's
Right,
how I'm so-called able to meet another person in that way.
right. I'm going to paraphrase what I think I understood, which is that you see yourself in other people and they're in you, that you're able to see how everyone is connected on a deeper level. And so whether that's God or divinity, some mysterious forces, we're all connected. And so while we are in our material world separate individuals, we have a deeper connection, and you go after that connection. Like, where am I in this person? How do they reflect me? And I'm in that person too, even though we have our material separateness, spiritually we are connected. And you focus on all of that. You focus on that connection. And you use the word mirror, the mirror, how we are mirrors of each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
In my case, that fateful evening, it was the literal mirror. I looked in the mirror and said, "Who are you? Who would you, who would care if you died tonight? What is life about?" I went through all the existential questions that probably everyone has asked themselves. But in my case, instead of just walking away and
mhm,
feeling dissatisfied and exhausted, I
mhm,
surrendered. And it was in that surrender that, as I talked to a Catholic priest, he said, "You surrender to God." I said, "That's a beautiful way of putting it." He said, "But you wouldn't put it that way." I said, "I do not shy away from using the word God, even though what I teach is non-duality. It's in that tradition, it's God is not a term that is used. I don't shy away from that because that would be unhelpful to a pretty good majority of people who do use that word."
So you've been applying all of this to um, our modern day partisanship and conflicts, our polarization. And and so, one thing that struck me about you was how, you are a trained de-escalator
Yes.
and you are trained to go to protests and other public events that could become violent, and you have the skills to de-escalate groups, and you've been able to de-escalate confrontations with the far left and far right activists. And from what I understand, you're able to treat them equally or be with them equally, and you have an equal level of confidence and courage in talking with them. And you've just explained the backdrop of how you're able to do this. Um, I'm curious if you have a story or two. Could you walk through how you talk to somebody?
A pretty far right, self-identified Christian, ultra conservative. These were terms that he would use to describe himself. I would not ascribe such terminologies to people. I'm more invested in how they define themselves instead of me applying the label. And it's through that lens that he was more invested in scripture and how people are going to hell because they're gay or they're trans or whatever. And these are psychological defects, et cetera, et cetera. My way of communicating with him included hearing him out, creating that space for him to be heard and to be seen, because ultimately that's what he wanted. He needed that validation. Why else would he come to a pride event and try to stir up trouble? The only reason that I could fathom that anyone would spend their weekend doing something like that is they feel some sort of need to be fulfilled in a way. And this is how they're going to do it. And I don't get distracted from this recognition of what's underpinning people's motivations. Well, it's about pride. Well, it really isn't about pride so much. Well, it's about the trans person. It's really not about them either. This is about you because you've carved out time in your day to be here. You probably spent money to come down here and to hold the Bible and preach the gospel. I'm more invested in knowing who you are and to let that shine. And so at the end of it, near the end, he says, "You cannot affirm this." And he was pointing around at the pride activity. I said, "Oh, but I do." How would you feel if somebody from a different teaching or tradition walked into your church in service to disrupt it? He says, "Are you daring to compare this to a congregation? I said, that's precisely what this is. By definition, this is a congregation. These are people who are coming together with a shared values, with a shared intent to celebrate together. That's all Pride really is a celebration. Or you could say playfully an excuse to get together to have playtime with people that they feel safe with. And who wouldn't want that? And even suggested that maybe the church exists for the reason of the congregation. It's not just for the sacrament. It's not just for, uh, the mashed potatoes and gravy at the end of service. It's much deeper than that. It's a connection. It's a belonging. It's a shared values. And this is no different. And so I would encourage you to really look deeper into what you're against. And at the end of it, he shook my hand. He said, this is what I was looking for. And he sort of gestured to both of us. And I said, a dialogue? He goes, well, whatever you call it. I said, it's called a dialogue. And I stepped a little closer to him and I said, I see you too. And I appreciate you being here. And it was an emotional moment. And we ended up shaking hands. And to the far left, the anarchist, that situation was those nasty Christians need to go home. They're trampling over my rights. I said to them, that might be true that they're attempting to stifle an activity or however you see it, but behind that, there's the need for control. And he said, yes, they're trying to control us. I said, no, 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 no. It's the need for control, and you're playing into that game. Why else would you refer to yourself as the left anarchist? This is your attempt to regain control because you feel that life is out of control. And you've done it for so long, you've forgotten the motivation. You've forgotten the underpinnings of what's behind this need to walk around with a bullhorn, refer to yourself as the anarchist, and be anti-establishment and anti-government and anti-Christian, etc. Where does it hurt? Because obviously you're hurting and you're not helping your cause or anyone's cause by putting all of this energy into pushing away people who are different. Their reply was, they're the ones pushing me. I said, that's interesting because they feel the same way about you. Their reply to me was, whose side are you on? And I said, you're presuming that there are sides to be on. And I'm not going to play that game with you. And so that was one of the few instances where I was extremely direct with someone in that context of getting them to look at their own motivations. It wasn't aggressive, but it was very direct and it was very intentional. But it was the only way to get them to reflect for just a moment.
Right. I can see how you use different strategies with people depending on the moment or the context or the person. So, with this particular person, you employed direct questions to, I think, accelerate a moment of reflection for this person, right? But in the other situation with the Christian preacher, I'll call him because he had the Bible there.
Yeah,
You recognize that he primarily needed to be seen and heard and validated and acknowledged. Um, and you gave that to him and he softened and you had an exchange, a dialogical exchange.
exactly.
I think it's fair to say that currently US society has splintered into subcultures and that the subcultures fall under two main fault lines of liberal leaning or conservative leaning. Like that's the spectrum, liberal conservative spectrum. And a lot of these subcultures fall on a side of that spectrum. So, Do you think cohesion is possible? And how do we get there if it's possible? Or maybe I'm making a presumption. Is it possible?
I know that it is possible. Of course, I can't speak to what will happen, but to the question, the inquiry on possibilities, it is absolutely possible. And here's how I can be so certain of that possibility. And I'll use the framework of quantum mechanics or string theory. It is the field of all possibilities. That if we could say, what is quantum mechanics in a nutshell? That life is the field of all possibilities. That would be, I'm sure some physicists out there would be like, well, it's a bit more complex. I'm sure that it is. Um, but my understanding of it is, it is the science that gets closer to the truth, but no science will get to the absolute truth because the absolute truth cannot be spoken, I would suggest. So, is it possible to have that cohesion? Yes. Are there people in the world that are working on that? Yes, and have been for a long time. If and when we see the other as a child, just like I'm a child, to be innocent, to be curious, then cohesion is right there. Of course, the argument to that would be, well, it takes two. That it's fine if you're curious, but what if the other is not curious? Well, the only way for that curiosity to emerge in them is they have to see it first. They have to see that it's possible in you to be at peace. And if you're expressing peace, even if it's nonverbal, they will resonate with that. They'll see that so clearly. And so, in this sort of subconscious recognition of, oh, it is possible. So, what does that say about me? Where do I fit into this mix? And if it's possible, then shouldn't I be getting on with the business of cultivating that? But for most people, they need to be invited into it. They need to see that it is not just possible, but it is embodied.
Embodied. It's not just a false word or a shallow word. Not that all words are shallow and false, because many are meaningful, but I think one thing we see is falseness behind words that aren't really meant. They're not embodied, they're not heartfelt, and they're not acted upon. Someone must take the first step and reach out and be loving, be kind, be welcoming, be curious, hear the other, see them. So as long as someone makes that first step, it is possible.
Well, here's the beautiful context of that. Possible for them in the moment. Because the next moment, the next experience, they may not feel that possibility. So it's going to be specific for them and their experience in that moment. I won't say that it's impossible or improbable for someone who's raised in fear, they're raised in hostility, they're raised in abandonment, etc. People who have had that experience from early in childhood have found peace. So I don't buy into this idea that people who are raised in broken families and violence are destined for violence themselves. They may express it, but to presume that it's going to be the rest of their life experience is the problem. It's in that presumption that, as a friend of mine that I lived with for about 13 years, um, she is a self-described curmudgeon, fixed in her ways, can't teach an old dog new tricks. It took about 10 years of being around her almost on a daily basis where she finally softened. It took that long. But then you have to take out the time frame and say, well, it didn't take that long. It only took that one moment where she finally reached out and asked for advice, where that hard veneer finally softened a little bit, where she finally came around and said, I appreciate that you never bought into my BS. You never caved in. And every time that I threw up this tantrum, you didn't buy it. And this is after years of daily, practically daily encounters where there's finally this recognition that she may have recognized all along, but that conditioning that she had been through, like all of us have, of separation, of fear, of lack, is not recognized, but that fear and lack overshadows it. They know what is good and loving and whole, but that wholeness is overshadowed by the sense of, well, I need to be right. I need to be first. I need to get reelected. I need to hold my position of power because I presume that no one else is going to be able to do it better than me. And so that's an overshadowing of what is known to be true, which is love is right here inside of me. And so is peace.
But that breaks through when a person is given that space, just as you gave that space to your friend to act out her script. And then she eventually detached from the script.
That's
Right.
a very eloquent way of putting it. Yes.
I'm curious about your thoughts, your feelings about the notion of acceptance. And what I mean by that is I notice that there are some people who say, "Oh, I don't care too much about acceptance. We're here to solve a problem. Let's just get to that. And I don't need to like you or agree with your lifestyle. Like, let's just talk about this and that's civil discourse. Like some people say that. Like, I don't need acceptance. I don't care about acceptance. While there are others who say, no, you must accept me for who I am fully as a human being before I'll even talk to you. I'm just curious. Thoughts on acceptance?
I can say about acceptance is that it's an inside job. If I'm not accepting me, I'm not going to be able to accept anything else. So if there's inner turmoil, if there's discordance in me, acceptance is not going to be part of my vernacular, and it's not going to be part of my experience. So in this sense of feeling divided within myself, it then becomes easy for me to see everyone else as divided as well. So it's not about acceptance, it's about assumptions, expectations. I like to say that those two things go hand in hand, they feed each other, expectations and assumptions. And that's the sort of mechanisms of maintaining the sense of division, separateness, as I like to call it. I didn't know true acceptance until I accepted life as it is, which was to say that I accept me as I am. In that moment of surrender that went deep enough to be sustained and not just popping up on occasion, this deep acceptance also included the things that are not comfortable and not desired. When I came out to my family back around 2000, when I finally said enough is enough, I'm not living this life to benefit you or to satisfy you, to show up in a masculine form. I'm done with that facade. My mother disowned me immediately. She said, and these are her words, I love you, but I'll never see you again. Now, I'm an adult at this point. So that was devastating, even as an adult, to hear your mother say, I love you, but I'll never see you again. I'm done with you, basically. She had disowned me. And she held to that for about 3 years until she finally acquiesced a little. But in her sense of needing control, she said, well, you're invited, not to me directly. She went to my sister to invite me to Christmas or Thanksgiving. I think it was Thanksgiving. And I was not allowed to go there myself. My sister had to pick me up take me there, and take me home so that I could not decide how long I stayed. This is her needing control of the situation. Now, at the time, that was difficult. I understood, but it was still difficult. After this moment of surrender, the only engagement I had with my mother in person was once, about a year before she passed away. Prior to that was simply an occasional phone call that I would call her, wish her happy Mother's Day, etc. She never asked how I was doing. And I said to her on the phone, this is after surrendering to me, after surrendering to God, if you like. I said, Mom, I love you, but I don't need you to be my mother for me to say that. On the other end of the phone was silence. And then after a moment of silence, she said, I don't understand what you're saying. You moved to California and you got weird. And I started laughing. I said, I get that. I love you because I can love myself. I love you regardless. And then I took it back. I said, no, I love you because I love. I accepted my mother to be dismissive, that she was not going to open up her arms to me. And that was my recognition of not just acceptance, but forgiveness. It's not that I forgave my mother, I forgave myself for having blamed my mother. And I did blame her for many things, for disowning me. And I realized in the moment that I told my sister that I forgive Mom, I realized in that instant that the forgiveness was for me. That forgiveness, like acceptance, is an inside job. And acceptance is unconditional. If I'm accepting of life, that includes everyone and everything. The invitation I would offer is to be more invested in accepting than being so preoccupied with what I don't like, what I have to resist. Because that's an exhausting, painful way to live. And yet I know it intimately because I lived it for so long.
Right. We have a preoccupation with being accepted by others first, right?
Exactly. You first and then me, I'll follow.
Right, exactly. Exactly. Would you say that your mother had a capacity that only went so far, right? Because of her own understanding or consciousness or her genetic makeup, her personality, her own upbringing, her cultural scripting, that she could only go so far, and that you came to accept that that was okay, that she couldn't reciprocate and go above her own ceiling, right? Like you
Exactly.
accepted that and forgave her and loved her regardless.
Yeah. To call that a relief is an understatement. It is it's the complete surrender. And I'm going to be poetic here. Surrender is for every moment, every thought, every experience. Surrendering the need for control. Surrender to myself, but in a religious context, surrender to God again and again and again. And in that surrender, I'm not looking for someone to be in acceptance of a transgender person. And even within the LGBT community, there's division. Terminologies are hung onto like a shield. Identities abound, but that's a microcosm of society.
Right.
Not all Jews are the same. Not all Republicans are the same. Not all conservatives are the same. No one's got as a young friend said, a lock on conservatism or liberalism.
Much as we want to have a lock, we don't have, no one has one. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's that preoccupation that is this perceived me versus them. It's an unhelpful framework. When I had was on the Amtrak training, I got on the train in Tacoma to come back to Vancouver. And a gentleman get on, I think, the stop after me. And because I was sitting at the seat that had the table, he sat there and he got his laptop out, I think, or a book. And he immediately started having a conversation with me. And it was all wonderful and cordial the entire trip until he got off the stop before me. And just as they were announcing the stop to get prepared to get your stuff together and disembark, he stood up and went on about having LGBT and all of this nonsense shoved down his throat. It was never brought up in our conversation. I was completely taken off guard with this. Where is this coming from? Things being shoved down your throat, LGBT topics. We never talked about any of that. So that told me he perceived me as being transgender. I am, but regardless, it was about his perception. It's not about what I am or am not. It's about his perception of me. And he stood up and immediately became aggressive. Now he put himself in a position of dominance because he's standing up. And he got close to me, so he's looking straight down at me and just raising his voice. Everyone in the car could hear him. And I didn't interrupt him. I let him have his moment. And I asked him the question, who's shoving things down your throat? And he said, you know damn well, it's the media, the liberals. And I asked him, do you consume liberal media? Well, that's not the point. And he went on. And he left in anger. And I looked across the way. There's a woman on the other side of the aisle, and she's looking at me going, what just happened? I said, you would have to ask him. It was shocking, so bizarre. And I bring that up to give an example. Life is as we perceive it. It didn't matter if I'm trans or not. It's how he perceived me. And if we're not open to seeing each other beyond that limitation, the identities, the labels, it's going to be a difficult road. And it has been a difficult road for many people.
I noticed that on the liberal side of things, that many liberals these days struggle with President Trump very, very deeply. There's a fixation on a person they see as evil and monstrous. And we're never going to get through anywhere good until he's out and his people are out and they're the problem. Right there, they are the problem. What do you say to that?
Perception is the difficulty. The so-called problem is the perception. And I have said this to liberal friends. Trump is a character, just like everyone's a character. If he were to pass away, if he is taken out of office by some means, it doesn't mean that everything goes back to the way you want it to be. So what is it that you really want? What is it that you really need? And how do you feel life is going to feel better for you? Because it's not about Trump, it's not about conservatism, it's about the actions that have been taken. So you can either invest in identity, identity politics, you can invest in yourself in, well, this person needs to be handled or taken care of, or they need to change their ways or vote differently. Or you can just look at the actions. What is the voting record? What is their history? What are their values? And then either address that or go within and reflect on what's really going on before you come back out to invest in the world, to find out how you can be of service, how you can be of help. Posting something online that somebody needs to die or someone that's been murdered, they deserved it or whatever. It doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help the situation. It's only reaffirming what you already believe. And so you'll be just chasing the next carrot.
Mm.
You know, it's Trump today, it's going to be someone else tomorrow. It's going to be a local politician that is on the Democratic side, but they don't vote Democratic. They don't vote in my interest, and they need to be removed. Can we talk about the actions that need to be taken right now and how we need to change the perception and how can we create a society where everyone is welcome to the table, that everyone they feel that they're being heard and being seen. But as long as you're preoccupied with, I'm not going to talk to them because they're self-described conservative, well, then you've just limited yourself. You've limited your experience. What if it were possible that you are the very liberal that they needed to hear from because you shared your story in such a way that they opened up, but you cut yourself off from that possibility because you didn't see them as them. You saw them as the title of conservative. And so therefore you know everything there is to know about them when that's not true. So it is about perception. And so my work is all about um, not getting people to change their perceptions, but to look at the mechanisms behind it. So the topics that we have when we do these community dialogues are uh, free speech. And the title for that was Freedom to Speak. Instead of talking about abortion, our topic was bodily autonomy. Instead of talking about red and blue, that topic was titled The Perceived Political Divide, which was the very first, at the time we were calling them town halls. We rebranded to be community dialogues because the political divide is a perception. And that's the difficulty that people have. And so the perceptions don't need to be challenged so much as they need to be investigated.
When you say the mechanisms behind perceptions, like investigating the mechanisms behind our perceptions, is that referring to inner work, like investigating our interior, what's going on inside of us, produce our perceptions? Yeah, yeah. Okay. Last question. You are a very optimistic person. I can say just being with you here today, I feel that you embody peace. And any last words of encouragement for people to keep on smiling, no matter what's going on, no matter who's president or what's happening, but any last words of encouragement?
For most people, probably to take a media diet or turn off the media that they're accustomed to and become familiar with and, quite frankly, comfortable with, and to be more curious about or leaning into the uncomfortability. We seem to have a crisis of an apparent crisis, I'll say, of needing and desiring comfortability, to have certainty. From that point of view, we will seek comfort in the things that are familiar, things that we feel or presume that are safe. I was working with a teenager some years ago at the request of their parents who was going through their own identity crisis, as all teenagers go through. But theirs was layered on with gender identity and sexual identity, etc. I said, don't become addicted to comfort because that will make life very difficult for you down the road. And they said, seek discomfort. And I said, well, you could seek for discomfort or just simply be open to it. Just be open to life. And if taking the media diet, turning it off for a bit, a week, a month, whatever that is going to be helpful to the degree in which you are open to relinquishing control and being open to having a new perception of life. Life's going to become very fun and very interesting.
Yes.
And so that's the encouragement, is to be more invested in the inner world before you reemerge in engaging the so-called outer world. Because after this deep investigation, or at least a moment of curiosity that you pop in and out of on occasion, will be sufficient to then find yourself starting to say something that's very familiar, like, oh, you're a conservative. Then you pause, and then you may say, well, instead of me applying that label to you, why don't you tell me what your story is? I would love to know how you come to that conclusion. What shaped your perception? Because not only are you helping the dialogue or cultivating the dialogue, not only are you inviting them into the dialogue, but you're inviting yourself into it as well. It becomes a self-perpetuating cycle of every syllable becomes an invitation, not just for them, but for you as well, to be still, to be open. And if that's the investment, life becomes a dance.
Yeah. Life becomes a dance. Let's end on that with that phrase. Life becomes a dance. I love it. Thank you so much, Leeza, for being here today. To say that I've enjoyed our conversation would be a vast understatement. I know I've been deeply moved.
Thank you. I so appreciate you.
And thank you again to everyone listening. If you would like more information about Braver Angels, please go to our website, braverangels.org. And to find out about local events, go to braverangels.org/Oregon.
I do not feel separated. Everyone I see is a part of me. Every heart I meet's related.
Music for this episode is Hello, I Love You, written by Ben Karen and Leo Gallo, and performed by Ben Karen, Fadine Keelty, Ray Cole, Nathan Heldman, Oscar Bugarin, and Mary Keating. Watch this and other songs by Ben Karen on youtube.com/Ben Karen Creates. That's BenCaroncreates. Thanks to Ben and team for allowing us to use this song.
I choose to love you, and with every breath I use these words to say